You're listening to Wild About Arizona, the official podcast of the Arizona Game and Fish Department.
Welcome to Wild About Arizona. I'm John Trewiler with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Today, we are talking about bats, the only true flying mammals and valuable human allies. Worldwide, they are primary predators of vast numbers of insect pests. Arizona, believe it or not, is home to more bat species than almost any other state. And here to talk with us about bats, anything and everything, is Angie McIntire, our bat management coordinator with the Arizona Game and Fish Department. Angie, welcome to the program. Happy to have you.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
So first of all, tell us a little about yourself, about your role here at the department. You're everything bats. You're our person.
Yeah, I am everything bats. I love bats. I worked for the department for 25 years, but for the last 17 years, I've been focused solely on bats. So bat conservation is sort of the main thing I focus on. I get to go out and do mist netting surveys, which involves capturing bats in different locations throughout the state. I also do cave surveys, which involves going underground and looking for bats that are living in caves or mines. I also do emergence surveys, which involves bats flying out from caves and video recording that and counting the number of bats that are living in that roost. So those are the fun things. I also work with partners around the state to help, give information about bats in different areas. I get to review environmental projects that are happening for their impacts to bats, talk with homeowners about their bat issues. So just a really wide variety of bat conservation topics.
Well, it's so cool and it's so unique because, first of all, when people think Arizona, and we've talked about this before, is that it's rattlesnake, saguaro cactus, Grand Canyon. Those are like the top things you think about. You think Arizona. You don't necessarily think bats. But as we just mentioned, there's a lot of bat species here. I mean, aren't we number 2 in the country, the most bat species? Not quite number 1, but we're up there.
Yeah, second to Texas. We claim 28 bat species. There's actually been 31 different species found here in Arizona. A couple of them were probably just flown in on from a weather event and very incidental. But we have just tremendous diversity, thanks in part to the diversity of habitats that we have here in the state and the size of the state. So just an incredible place to study bats.
Well, that is just so cool. So can you talk on that, about that biodiversity of bats in Arizona? And I mean, that's just fascinating that this part of the country is home to so many bats.
Yeah, so in the southeast part of the state, we can actually capture more bats than any other part of the country. You can catch up to about 22 different species, so that's pretty remarkable. And we have, so for example, the California leaf-nosed bat is a species that is found just in the southwest and primarily in Arizona, although it does go into California and Nevada. Really cool bat that has large eyes and gleans insects off of vegetation. It's active year-round. It has to live in warm mines during the wintertime so it doesn't hibernate or migrate away. So that's a really unique species to the southwest. We have, and it's a phyllostomid bat, which are the nectar. The other members of that family are nectar eaters that are in the state. We've got a tremendous amount of myotis species, which are, I like to kind of refer to them as kind of the sparrows of the bat world because they look pretty similar to one another. We have 9 different species of myotis. Just tremendous diversity with bats with big ears. We've got 4 different tree roosting bats, and we have 5 different molossid bats, which are the free-tailed bats, everything from the largest species of bat throughout the U.S., the greater western mastiff bat, to the fastest bat, the Mexican free-tail bat, which roosts in these super mega colonies, up to over millions of bats in a single colony.
Who knew there were so many bat names? Is that I know with Jeff Myers, who was on with us once before, and he talked about a certain bat. It must be the Mexican free-tail he said it was nicknamed the Italian sports car of bats because it's so fast.
Exactly. Yeah, and they have really narrow wings. They're just so amazingly fast. Their wings even make kind of a ripping sound as they come back to their roosts in the morning, early in the morning. I've actually been out at a large roost site and observed the bats returning, which is kind of, a lot of times we go and watch them leave, but to actually witness them returning. And their wings make this incredible zipping kind of sound as they slow themselves down to get back into the mine. Really fast, very fast bat.
I mean, can you even see them much at night? They're so fast because they're dark and small and usually around sunset, right? So it's got to be hard to notice.
Yeah. So, and when they fly out of the mine, when we do an emergence survey, we use special lighting. We use infrared lights and cameras that can pick that up because they are emerging right about dusk and then into the night. And I think it's why, people would be surprised at the number of bats that are flying around on any given night because we can't observe them. The average person can't observe them like we can observe birds. But in fact, a lot of similar sorts of things are happening over our heads in the complete darkness.
It's nice and eerie.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, there's bats probably above you. Can you talk to us, Angie, a little bit about the biology just of the buildup of the bat? I mean, these are really fascinating creatures. I'm always so fascinated by when you guys tell us about just the number of bugs they eat. It's like sustainable pest control almost, eating all the mosquitoes and everything they do. It's such a fascinating creature.
Yeah, and so Mexican free-tail bats, again, because they form such large colonies, there have been studies showing the amount of tons of insects that they eat on a given night. And other bats are more specialized to eat beetles and other forest pests. The pallid bat eats scorpions.
Well, that's good.
And centipedes. And so bats really are kind of our friends if you don't like biting insects and stinging creatures and things like that. But they're so fascinating because they're also different. There's over 1,400 different species of bats worldwide.
Wow. And
we've actually just found new species within the last few years. So it's an order of mammal that we're still learning so much about. And really, bats are very slow to reproduce. So they're nothing at all like rodents, which, if you know anything about rodents, they tend to have very large, number of young at any given birth time. But bats only have one baby called a pup, typically. Some species will give birth to 2, possibly 4, but that's really kind of on the extreme. And most bats just have one young. And they're very long-lived.
Okay.
Bats can live... the oldest recorded lifespan of a bat was over 40 years. So it's pretty incredible for such a small animal.
Is there a certain part of the state where bats are more prevalent than others? Like where in Arizona would we most find bats, or is it pretty much they're all over the state?
Well, they're all over the state. In terms of diversity, the southeastern part of the state is the most diverse, but the whole state has tremendous diversity, and we have different species occurring in different areas. One of my favorite bats is the spotted bat, and that one is found up more in the canyon area around the Grand Canyon. It's this really beautiful bat it's got black fur with 3 white spots on its back and these huge pink ears. And so you've got species like that up in the north. You've got the nectar-feeding bats that occur more in the southern part of the state. And then different bats have different strategies in terms of how they colonize. So again, going back to the Mexican free-tail bat, when you hear about these colonies of millions of bats, it's always that species, whether it's in Texas and some of their really large colonies. But then other bats, it's very, very common to just hang out with one or two other roost mates. And so it can be very common for a particular species to be in very low numbers or very high numbers.
What is there a bat that's most commonly seen in the sky in Arizona?
Probably the Mexican free-tailed bat is the most common. The cave myotis is a common species of myotis, especially, it kind of depends on where you're talking about. So if you're around a bridge, an urban bridge, there are species that are more commonly found around an urban, in an urban environment, like a lot of wildlife. Bats certainly can be generalists or specialists and do better in some parts, some environments than others. So in an urban environment, you've got Mexican free-tailed bat. The Yuma myotis is a species that loves to live in bridges and near water, and the cave myotis as well. It's like that.
I guess, is there too a bat that's most popular, that when people think bat, like what bat are they probably thinking of or seeing?
Well, that's a good question, because I think, and I've gone out with Jeff before on the watchable wildlife events where they do the bat nettings, and it's so rewarding to see how excited people get to see a bat up close. And I felt the same way the first time I saw a bat up close. I'd never seen a bat, so I didn't really know what a bat face looked like. And I think a lot of times what I'm assuming people imagine is sort of, just the Batman kind of silhouette image of a bat
Right.
without a face. And their faces are so incredible. Some of them have little leaf appendages on their nose. Sometimes those are really pointy and long in other parts of the world. Some of them have big eyes, small eyes, big ears, small ears. There's just such a tremendous variety. So it's a good question, what do people imagine? They probably imagine kind of a myotis, big brown, sort of plain-faced bat. But in fact, the faces are just so incredible.
Well, and I guess then, kind of along those lines, what does a bat feel like? Because most of us will never touch a bat, but, what is their skin like?
Yeah, and it's a good thing to not touch a bat.
Sure.
Like
I would not want to.
Like all wildlife, you shouldn't handle
Of course.
wildlife that's within reach. But bats have fur on their bodies, for most of them, and so they feel kind of like a silky, furry, like a cat, or just like the silky fur. Their wings are really neat to touch. Their wings feel kind of like saran wrap. I had a friend once that said,
Really?
wow, this feels kind of like saran wrap. Or recently, because in a very controlled situation at the nettings, we do let people touch, a bat wing while we have the bat, within our, within our hold. And someone said, oh, this feels kind of like a balloon. So it's kind of a soft, you can tell it's really strong, but very supple. Their wings are just incredible. The wings encompass their hands, and they fly with their hands, basically. And so they're very, very strong. And they heal very quickly, too, if they get a little hole in them, if they, run into something and tear a little bit. It's amazing how fast their wings will heal.
Well, and don't they kind of use the wings, too, almost as a scoop to collect bugs? Is that correct? Or
some bats will use, they'll use their tail membrane. So when a bat is flying along and echolocating, which is something that bats do to navigate in the total darkness and to find insects, and so some of the smaller bat species, especially when they hone in on on an insect, a flying ant or something, or a mosquito, and then they'll use that tail membrane to help increase the amount of surface area that they've got to grab the insect with.
now bats kind of they kind of get a bad rap. They kind of have a bad reputation out there. Sometimes when you think bats, they're often associated kind of with Halloween or horror or Dracula, the type of stuff. But they're not really a bad creature, are they, Angie?
They're not a bad creature at all. And I think, we're afraid of things that we don't know about. We're afraid of things in the dark.
Sure.
A lot of
especially if they are dark as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's understandable how these fears have arisen, but I think that especially in the more recent years, people. I get contacted by a lot of people who are really fascinated and interested in bats. And people are starting to understand what an important role they serve in the ecosystem, and they're really nothing to be afraid of. Bats don't attack. Sometimes I think bats will. I've sat outside of a mine doing an emergence survey and really had the feeling that the bats were checking me out, kind of flying near to me to see, well, what is this, potential predator sitting outside my cave? And so they can kind of fly nearby and just sort of, and then fly off. But, it makes a lot of sense for bats to flee versus ever attack, because they're so small and we're so large. So it's really not anything to worry about for, that bats are going to attack or be anything to be concerned about.
Yeah. Is there a time of year when bats are most active or more active than normal, or a time when people may see more bats than?
Definitely, yeah. I would say kind of the fall and spring are two times when people might encounter bats in a temporary sort of situation. Bats will, temporarily roost on a patio or at a home, and a lot of times that will resolve itself within a couple of weeks, and the bats will move on. So I do get a lot of calls and a lot of questions, usually in August and September, and then again in March and April, and bats are on the move at those times. But certainly in the summertime when females are raising young, that's a very active time too. So there's always some level of activity, but certainly in the wintertime there's a little less.
And we've talked a lot about kind of the caves and the dark places where people may see, where a bat may live. You probably wouldn't be in a cave to see a bat. I guess you could, but is that their preferred environment for a bat? Can you kind of talk about what's the perfect spot for a bat in Arizona?
Yeah. Well, and that's a good question, too, because it kind of depends. And a lot of times that's the answer for any question
right.
you ask me about bats. But
because there's so many.
There's so many, and they are all, we think of bats as sort of this general, thing, but they're all so different. And so depending on which species, there are 4 tree roosting bats that look like dead leaves when they're roosting in, a tree. And so like a red bat will look like a dead fall leaf in a cottonwood tree. A hoary bat will roost on the side bark of a tree and look and very much be camouflaged by the bark of a tree. So there's the tree roosting bats that look like foliage. There's also tree roosting bats that prefer to get up under the bark of a tree or to roost in the hollow portion of a tree. And so some species of bats never go into a cave or never go into a mine. There are other bats that will roost pretty much anywhere, in bridges, in homes, in caves, in rock crevices, so in rock piles. Some species will roost in rock piles, and we know even less about those and where to find those, but just it's really interesting.
I should have asked where don't they like to live?
Right. Well, once I heard of some bats living in a buoy on a lake and
really?
Flying out of a buoy. So, yeah, it's a good question. Where won't they roost?
Wow. So if people see a bat in their backyard or maybe around their home, what should they do? Should they be concerned at all, Angie?
Well, I would say it kind of depends on where they see the bat. So if they find a bat outside on a wall of their home and a low portion of the wall or out on the patio, if there are pets in their backyard, things like that, That's cause for concern because that bat may be dehydrated. It may, have some kind of health issue, and it may have rabies. Very few bats have rabies. The ones that get turned in, it's still even a low percentage. But one thing is for sure, and that's if a bat is in a vulnerable position like that, there is something going on with it. So, people should not handle bats. They should contact their local animal control, or they can contact us to find out what to do next.
And what's the best way to contact? Is it through our bat email, right?
Yeah, our bat email, bats@azgfd.gov, is a really quick way to get in touch with me and assess the situation and whether any further action needs to take place.
But don't touch it. Don't try to crab it in a box or collect it, anything
well, they
like
can
that.
collect it. They could collect it in a box. Yeah, if they feel comfortable to do something like that to contain it, that's absolutely fine. And that's, you put a box over it, slide a piece of cardboard under it just to secure it, especially if there's potentially been if their pet has been near the bat, and there's any question about whether the pet has touched the bat or if a human has touched the bat, then that's the right thing to do.
I know some people even really welcome bats kind of towards or around their home. They'll build like a bat house or something. I mean, some people love the bats in their neighborhood or near their home.
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of people reach out to me wanting to build bat houses. In the Phoenix area, bat houses don't work so well because it gets so hot here. And we find bats roosting in bridges and other concrete structures because that concrete really helps to keep them cooler during our hottest times. And a bat house just can't do that. But in other parts of the state, bat houses work really well. Even in Tucson, they can work, but especially up north. And yeah, people are really enthused about bats and wanting to get rid of the mosquitoes that are near their home or other insects, and just wanting the ecosystem to be as healthy and normal as possible. Wanting to offer them homes for that reason.
Yeah, an unair-conditioned bat house just doesn't even sound comfortable in Phoenix.
Yeah, too bad that doesn't work. But I think they have a thing with the airflow that makes the air conditioning not ideal.
Absolutely. Now, we've kind of talked about this too briefly, but we'll talk about it a little bit more here because there are several ways that the department here at Arizona Game and Fish allows the public to really get up close and personal to bats or to learn more about bats. And I know, didn't we just do one recently, these bat nettings? Can you talk about those? Yeah,
so in our Watchable Wildlife program, they typically do a series of netting events that the public can join and get up close and personal with bats. And so we just did one this about a week ago, or I should say in late August, and we only caught one bat, unfortunately, one pallid bat, and that was our target species. It was a combination of a research project. We were collecting bat droppings to see the different scorpion species that these bats eat across the Southwest.
Okay.
To help a researcher in Texas. But people love attending these events, and they usually get to see a variety of different species, especially during the June and July events.
So how many times a year do we offer that for the public if they want to learn more about bats and potentially get up and close to one?
I believe there's about 6 or so of those events. It's scattered at 3 different locations. Of course, COVID has made things atypical, and we actually weren't able to do any events last year, and then, a limited number this year. But next year, hopefully, things will be more normal for that, and there'll be 6 or 7 events probably.
And people can contact our Watchable Wildlife program if they want to learn more or attend a class?
Exactly, yep.
What's the biggest misconception you hear when it comes to bats in Arizona?
Well, there's a couple. People assume that all bats carry rabies or that they carry disease. And there's concern, that people have about their droppings and whether, and basically that bats carry disease. But actually rabies is the issue with a down bat. But other than that, there isn't anything to worry about really with bats.
Are there any, do you have a favorite bat moment from your career here at the department that comes to mind over your many years of working with the species?
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many neat opportunities out in the field with bats, but there was a really large colony of Mexican free-tailed bats that was discovered just a little over 10 years ago. So number one, to have this incredibly large colony discovered just within the last 10 years was pretty amazing. But when we went out to see how many bats were there, and our mouths were just hanging open at the number of bats that were flying out of this site. And when we went in afterwards to see how many bats were left inside, it's something that I always tell people, you don't have anything to worry about with bats. They don't attack, all these things. Well, there were bats that were flying into the walls, and some of them were flying into us, and I had never experienced anything like that. So as I started to wonder what's going on here, what we realized were that these were young bats, and they were flying for some of them possibly their first time, and they were practicing flying up and down the halls of this mine. And some of them were very clumsy because they are, like I mentioned earlier, they're built like jet airplanes, and there's likely a pretty steep learning curve to get control of your wings. And it was just a really special moment because we were witnessing all of these very young bats learning to fly for the first time.
That is pretty impressive. If people, you get to see bats so often, obviously because of your profession, but if people want to go out and maybe try to see a bat in the wild, like a large group of them, I mean, there are some locations, even some urban locations, even in the Phoenix area, right, where people can actually go at sunset and kind of see the bats fly out and for the night?
Yeah, one of the best places to go in the Phoenix area is at 40th Street in Camelback. Right along the canal there's a flood control tunnel, and there's approximately 5,000 to 10,000 bats that live in the tunnel. And the tunnel has an eastern opening and a western opening, and the bats actually fly out from either end. And during the summer months primarily, so the bats arrive back from Mexico around May, and they're there through about September. But it's a great place to go and watch bats emerge, and there's usually a crowd of people there on any given night watching that. There's a couple other urban bridges, and then there's a handful in Tucson as well. And I believe that information may be on our website too, so people can see if they're interested in going out.
Yeah, I've been to the bat tunnel at 40th and Camelback, and I think we even have a game and fish sign right there. This is the bat tunnel. Or, of course, I was with our biologists, so they're they explain it all. But it's really interesting to see them fly out and collect their dinner basically, and then come back, and they can go pretty far from their nest, right, or their roost.
Exactly. Yeah, that species can probably fly 20 to 25 miles one way. It just likely depends on where the insects are. So they fly out, they break into smaller groups, and they hunt in these smaller groups or singly, and they can really cover a lot of ground. So they're probably all over the Phoenix area just from that single colony.
If people want to learn more about bats or bats in Arizona, where should they go, Angie?
Well, they can go to our website. Is probably the best place.
Right.
There's also, one of our partnering organizations, Bat Conservation International, has a lot of good information about bats. There's whitenose-syndrome.org is another really good website for finding out more about white nose syndrome and bats in general. So there's a lot of really good resources out there.
And it's www.azgfd.gov/bats. Really simple there. And then as we talked about, if people want to get in touch with you, the easiest, most effective way is just bats at azgfd.gov, right?
Right. Easy to remember, and it will get to me.
Well, if it's trivia night and there's a bat question, you're my phone a friend now, Angie, when it comes to bats.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us and sharing everything with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. Visit us online at www.azgfd.gov.